Welcome to the Catholic Midlife Podcast, where we address the challenges and the opportunities of midlife from a uniquely Catholic perspective. This is the time, my friends, for a deeper renewal of your Christian vocation. Come and enter into the freedom of Christ that allows you to be the person you were created to be, because there's an amazing, awesome, exciting next season of life waiting for you. Hello, and welcome to the Catholic Midlife Podcast. You're here with Karen and Curtis Herbert. Hi, Curtis.
Hi, Karen. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Hey, we heard from a listener, and she said, Karen and Curtis, I enjoyed and found food for thought in your podcast episode, Ask the Right Questions About Suffering. And I'm looking forward to listening to the Suffering in the Process that just dropped. And that was back at episode 69. The suffering season.
Okay, so not so long ago after all.
Not so long ago, and you returned from being out of town recently.
I did. I was in sunny San Diego. It was beautiful.
Very beautiful. And while you were out, I went out too, and I went to see Barbie.
Barbie?
The Barbie movie.
Movie? Really?
I really enjoyed it.
Really? That is so interesting.
I really did. Now, it's a little hard to listen to things you don't agree with. And maybe that's just me.
Yeah.
But still, I enjoyed the movie a lot. And the monologue has received a lot of attention. So, Karen, we're going to talk about perfectionism today.
Okay.
And some things about it and why you probably don't want it and how it's really not serving you. And I think the Barbie monologue speaks to that. Now, you haven't heard this before.
You know, as usual, I'm totally out of touch, so I didn't know it was a thing.
Yeah.
But apparently it's making the rounds.
Yeah, it's a thing. So what's happening is Barbie, that's Margot Robbie, she's blonde. It's because I was trying to find a clip of this to show you, and you're like, is that Barbie? Like, no, that's not Barbie. So Barbie, she's coming back to Barbie Land, which is this utopia. But she's just coming back from the real world, which is not a utopia.
It is not true.
And she's with Gloria, who's a woman in the real world. Gloria's struggling in her own life. They're together. And Barbie's coming back. She's in despair because her feminist utopia has been taken over by the Kens. The Kens are like, dude, the patriarchy in the real world, it's so awesome.
Oh, funny. That's the plot.
Yeah, so the kids have like moved into our utopia house and they're playing pool and they're like, beer me, bruh. And a Barbie runs over and gives him a beer. And the male lead, he's this bare-chested, incredible physical specimen wearing this like mink coat, you know. And so Barbie is she's super overwhelmed at this point. Yeah. She's in despair for the first time. And she's feeling really inadequate. And she says, I'm not smart enough to be interesting. I can't do brain surgery. I've never flown a plane. I'm not president. No one on the Supreme Court is me. I'm not good enough for anything.
Oh.
And so Gloria, the lady from the real world, says, It is literally impossible to be a woman. You are so beautiful and so smart. It kills me that you don't think you're good enough. Like, we have to always be extraordinary, but somehow we're always doing it wrong. You have to be thin, but not too thin, and you can never say you want to be thin. You have to say you want to be healthy, but also you have to be thin. You have to have money, but you can't ask for money because that's crass. You have to be a boss, but you can't be mean. You have to lead, but you can't squash other people's ideas. You're supposed to love being a mother, but don't talk about your kids all the time. And you have to be a career woman, but also always looking out for other people. You have to answer for men's behavior, which is insane. But if you point that out, you're accused of complaining. You're supposed to stay pretty for men, but not so pretty that you tempt them too much or that you stand out, because you're supposed to be part of the sisterhood and you shouldn't threaten other women. And you should always stand out and always be grateful. But don't forget that the system is rigged. So find a way to acknowledge that, but also always be grateful. You have to never get old, never be rude, never show off, never be selfish, never fall down, never fall, never show fear, never get out of line. It's too hard. It's too contradictory. Nobody gives you a medal or even says thank you. And it turns out, in fact, that not only are you doing everything wrong, but also everything is your fault. I'm so tired of watching myself and every single other woman tie herself into knots so that people will like us.
Holy moly. Wow. Well, I could totally see why that's making the rounds. That's pretty incredible monologue.
Well, it is. And it's resonating with the public. A reviewer said it's a show-stopping monologue. Had everybody applauding.
Well, there's a lot to resonate with in that. Being pulled in all those different directions and having to manage it all and do it all well.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of messages to women that are signaled so strongly that feeling that all that contradictory pressure is pretty typical, frankly.
Yeah.
And that's why it's a reason the movie's so popular. This is one of the it's a huge, like $1 billion movie. And from the standpoint of perfectionism, these are messages of perfectionism. So the monologue, Gloria is talking about all these contradictions.
Yeah.
I have to be thin, not too thin. I can't say I want to be thin.
Yeah.
I have to be healthy, but you better be thin.
Yeah.
And on and on. And so these are socially prescribed perfectionism. So there's some different things that the sociologists like to talk about in terms of perfectionism. So socially prescribed perfectionism, it's directed to you from the environment. And it involves the belief that others expect me to be perfect. That's one of the thoughts it creates in you.
So this is the society's message to me that creates this perfectionism and expectation.
It's socially derived perfectionism. So it's directed from the environment. It involves the belief. I have the belief that others expect me to be perfect because I'm getting all these messages. I have to be a mom. I have to be a career. I have to love my kids. I have to, And by the way, I was cooking for all the kids.
Yeah, while I was gone.
Yeah, it was a lot.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it, but it was a lot. One day, the refrigerator was so empty. I came home and I was looking for something to eat, and even the carrots were gone.
And you're thinking, I just cooked all this enormous pile of food. Where did it go?
Yeah. Exactly.
I resonate with you.
You resonate.
I get it.
So socially derived perfectionism, others expect me to be perfect. And socially prescribed perfectionists often feel a lot of pressure and kind of this helplessness.
Interesting. So this is a thing. This is a real, described, researched reality.
Right. So we're following a book by Thomas Curran, and it's sort of a mixed bag, but he reviews literature or talks to leading people. And this is one of the big buckets. There's self-directed perfectionism, other-directed perfectionism, and then the socially derived perfectionism. So this is what we're talking about now, is this category of we're getting this perfectionism from the environment. It's just this encompassing belief that everybody always expects us to be perfect. Then when we fall short, we can just feel that judgment burning down on us. So
how does this show up in society, or how do we experience it?
Yeah, I'm not sure what you mean.
Well, are there things in society particularly that create this dynamic?
Well, our environment, of course, it includes our family of origin.
Sure.
And this is something you mentioned to me when I was telling you, hey, we're going to talk about perfectionism. And I think we all appreciate that as parents or as sons and daughters, we can get these messages sometimes growing up. and from our school system and so forth. So that is part of the environment. Curran, he really emphasizes how the air we breathe in the West, and especially in the US, I think, and similar kinds of countries, really drives perfectionism deep into all of us. It is everywhere, all pervasive, and invisible often to us.
Yeah. So is it partly consumerism?
Right. So our role, we have to be consumers. That's how our economy is set up. There's a lot of great things about our economy, but it does make us be consumers. This can lead to consumerism. Being a consumer is about filling deficits. There's something I need, so I go get it. Marketing to consumers is all about creating deficits.
Yeah. Okay, I get it.
You're not enjoying life until you have this beer. You're not having a good time with your friends until you go on this great vacation. The entire marketing industry is obsessed with creating deficits by and large in us.
So in a way, every product is going to try to get you to believe that you're missing something so that you'll buy their product.
Right, and that's a big part of it. And the other part that Curran really dwells on is, look, we have a competitive society.
Yeah.
It is competitive. We are pitted against each other, or even if it's not direct competition, we know that if we don't produce, if we don't stay on top of our game, that we're going to move down the ladder or be kicked off.
Yeah.
And have to go find a different way to provide for our families. We don't have a lot of security. There are many reasons for this, but there's a commodification of labor at all levels. And treating labor as a commodity, that's very contrary to Catholic social teaching, but it's crept into our economy, again, for many reasons. It's not diagnosing, I guess, or I'm observing is what I'm trying to do.
Yeah.
And just think about how competitive this society is, Karen. I know when we had a kid playing baseball, I went out and hired a coach, did some group coaching just to keep that kid on the level playing field so that he could play and not be on the bench, just to stay even with the other kids. Because I realized at a certain point that, man, they're all going to these coaching places and doing the batting practice, and holy moly.
Yeah. So then you feel like if you want to be improving and progressing and making the team, you got to be doing that.
That's right. And helicopter parenting, that is an extreme kind of version of over supporting your kids.
Yeah.
However, we know as parents that if our kids start to fall behind, that it's really going to cost them. I mean, if you're falling behind in middle school, then it's setting you up to do poorly in high school, which is setting you up to do poorly in our, by and large, extremely competitive higher educational system. And so as parents, we really have to balance stepping in to stave off the disasters,
right,
or the immature behavior, missing deadlines and stuff that would prevent our kids from being able to exercise their talents down the road. It's very competitive. Certainly, I've talked to people that are putting their kids in elite kindergartens. They have the behavioral tests. Your kids have to get along,
right,
or else you can't get in.
Yes. Yeah. And I think part of that can be also geographic. Some parts of the U.S. are going to be more heavily competitive around that than others. And part of what I'm hearing you saying, though, is it's the air we breathe, so it's everywhere. And it's in many, many different areas of life.
Yeah, so I want you to buy in to the idea, Karen, that you are a perfectionist.
Dang. I was really trying not to be.
Well, it's everywhere. And there's a continuum of perfectionism from the full out helicopter parent to down to the overbearing and so on. There's a continuum of perfectionism, and there's different areas of life. There's different roles of life, for instance, which is a good way to think about it. Mom, dad, worker, chef. That's a key role, right?
Yeah. So part of what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is, there's some of us who know we're perfectionists and we fall into this, maybe one of these other categories that you mentioned around, self-directed or other directed perfectionism. And also, if we breathe this air, we're just all perfectionists pretty much at some level.
Well, we are, and it shows up in the ways we think and the ways we talk and interact with others. That starts to really be how we can see it coming out. And I don't think we're going to get to all of that in this episode. Should I tell the Lance Armstrong story?
Sure. I'd love to hear it.
Okay.
Myself.
Yeah. So I knew this lady. She was a huge Lance Armstrong fan. Huge fan. Because he won 7 Tour de France in a row, which is unheard of. It's like winning 7 Super Bowls in a row. That just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And Lance Armstrong was caught using performance-enhancing drugs. He was blood doping, I think, more specifically. And he was stripped of all his titles. And I asked her about it. I said, well, but he was stripped of his titles. She said, they were all doing it. They were all doing it. I still think he's the greatest ever.
Yeah.
And so naturally, once you're caught blood doping and stripped of all your national titles, what do? You go on Oprah.
Oh, that's not what I was thinking.
Yeah. This is a few years ago, but you go on Oprah. So Oprah is having this conversation with him, and she asks him, why? Why, Lance? Why did you do this? And he sat up straight and he looked her straight in the eye. He's been waiting for this. And he's saying, I didn't do it to gain an advantage. The culture was what it was. It was a competitive time. We were all grown men. We all made our choices. Basically, he said he chose to dope because everybody else was doping.
Oh.
He had to do it just to keep up. And people die from the use of performance-enhancing drugs in bicycling. I think the current thing is they use erythropoietin, which is a blood-stimulating production drug. And people die from that.
They still use drugs? They still dope?
Oh, yeah. It's everywhere. And the literature is full of trying to find tests to show up. How can you find markers of, you take a minuscule amount of EPO, how can you tell that that great vascular content is in part because of recombinant EPO?
Wow.
So kind of getting in the weeds there. But how we behave, we're part of the culture. We're greatly influenced by how other people behave. And I want to just keep on with this theme, Karen. So think this theme that, hey, you are a perfectionist, or you have these perfectionist messages internalized. So here's a question for you, Karen. How many women have you met? How many women have you talked to that don't have body self-image issues?
Wow. Well, that's very interesting, because when it comes up in conversation, it's often because people do. And it's very common. It's extremely common. So I actually can't name anybody in my head right now and say, well, I totally know this person has no body image issues.
Yeah. So an extreme example of that is anorexia or bulimia, where you've got your unconscious even is totally not getting the image right. But you have the thoughts, at least. I think all women almost have at least some thoughts about their body image. And it's because that's very much because of the consumer culture, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And I guess the gender culture.
Yeah, everybody wants to lose 5 pounds or 10 pounds.
Yeah. Karen, we're getting to the end here. I want people to appreciate that they're getting all these perfectionism messages from the culture. And that's important because perfectionism doesn't help us. It undercuts us. It goes deep to our core. I mean, at a kind of a bottom line level, perfectionism is dehumanizing. It dehumanizes us because all of a sudden our value is found in our performance or our identity. It's our usefulness. It's our beauty, our presentation that's important. And that's perfectionism. And we are not important. It's these other things that we do or that we present to others that become important. And this undermines everything we are as humans and as Christians and as just agents in the world.
One thing that's striking me from what you were saying, Curtis, is I tend to think of we all have areas we want to progress in or be better in. And normally I wouldn't think of that as perfectionism because I might think, well, I'm not trying to be perfect there. I'm just trying to be average or I'm just trying to improve and get better. But if there's this deficiency mindset or feeling underneath that, and part of what I'm hearing you saying is, well, that is this perfectionist message because I've got the deficiency mindset in there.
I think that's right, Karen, the deficiency mindset. And it reminds me of virtue. Virtue is an invitation to excellence. It's an invitation to increase your capacity. And so, naturally, you want to grow. That's such a human thing. It's a impulse and gift from God to want to grow. But as we talk more about self-directed perfectionism in the next episode, I think this is the kind of what we think about when we talk about perfectionism. We'll see a little more clearly how, this is not helping us. We're giving a lot of messages. We're resisting things that are going to help us. And it's not boosting our performance or anything.
Yeah. Great. I'm really looking forward to that conversation next week, Curtis. We hope all of our listeners will join us. Just at FYI to everyone out there, we will be starting up some more self-compassion classes in the fall. We took a little break for the summer, and we know how popular they are and how much people have been waiting for them. So just a little teaser, keep your eyes and ears peeled, and we'll be giving you some dates for that in the very near future.
That is great. Thanks, everybody, for being here, and we'll see you next week. Thanks for being here with us. The Catholic Midlife Podcast is for anyone that wants to receive the abundance of life that God has for each one of us. Take a moment right now to tell a friend about us.